Hi, good afternoon and welcome to our first seminar in 2020. Today it will be Frric Clavert from the University of Luxembourg, more specifically the Center for Contemporary and Digital History. Frédéric is a specialist in the history of economic and monetary integration of Europe, and he's obviously also interested in historians and their use of digital primary sources. For his talk today, he's going to talk about his research project on commemorating the Great War on Twitter, and I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for, good evening. Thanks a lot for organizing this seminar. I will try to use my better English, but you will pardon my very French English anyway. What I'm going to speak about tonight, so it's how did Twitter accounts commemorate the Great War on Twitter. I will start by an introduction that will focus a bit on the context of the centenary itself. The centenary is a very large-scale series of commemoration in very different countries, usually, but not only the former winner of the First World War, not only because you had, for instance, a very interesting exhibition at the Deutsches Museum in Berlin. So it's not only the winner of the First World War, but mainly them. And the centenary happens in a time of what some scholars have described as a time of memory inflation, basically. And it's usually described with very negative words, which is criticized as well. Since the 1980s, we commemorate more. We have more and more a presence of the memory of the past, which is not exactly history. And there is a growing literature about that. This growing literature, if I take just the French example, so my examples will be quite French tonight. Of course, we've got the seminal work of Maurice Halbwachs in 1925, but if we stick to the 80s, there is Les Lieux de Mémoire, which is a series of 3 volumes by Pierre Nora, edited by Pierre Nora, the first one being published in 1984, the last one in 1992, and which is usually very quoted a lot. And Pierre Nora, at the end of this project, wrote a chapter and an article about this inflation of collective memory that we're living in. Of course, there's not only French authors, German authors such as Aleida and Jan Assmann did also study this phenomenon. Andreas Wisson is of German origin, but professor at the Columbia University in New York, did also write, for instance, about the globalization of collective memory. And within this growing literature, starting from the 2000s, some authors were questioning the way we were seeing the past. That's, for instance, Hartog and Gumbrecht. So Hartog is French, Gumbrecht German, who, based on the work of Reinhard Koselleck and the notion of experience of the past, questions and emphasize the growing importance of the present over the way we see the past. In this literature, I will stop a bit about Jan Assmann. So here quoted by Marek Tam, with a Finnish colleague, in an article that is very nice because it's really summarizing this literature about memory studies. Jan Assmann insists on the fact that media, the media ecosystem, and the way we store the information about the past are part of what is defined as collective or cultural memory. And that's, of course, what we are going to talk about tonight, because here we're going to talk to see how a new media, social media, Twitter, influence the way we commemorate the past and we remember the past. I'm not the only one to ask that kind of questions. I will quote, for instance, Andrew Hoskins, who edited a book called Digital Memory Studies in 2017, and one of the most meaningful sentence in his introduction is, the past has been stripped of its once retrospective coherence and stability, and tangled in today's melee of uncertainty. So there is still this idea that we see the past through the eyes of the present, and that it leads to an uncertain and unstable way to see the past. So that's a bit the context of the centenary. So the centenary of the First World War, it's a major commemoration in a time of collective memory inflation. It's also the first large-scale commemoration in the era of social media. Of course, there were other smaller-scale commemoration about that were tweeted, for instance, or that were present on Facebook. Well, here you've got a series of commemoration that last 4 years, implying lots of countries. So it's really a very good occasion to study what social media are making to the way we commemorate and to the way we remember the past. And from the beginning of the centenary, heritage institutions, and not only them, took really advantage of social media and used social media to try to involve a large audience in their initiatives. I could, for instance, give the example of European 1914-1918 that developed partnership with lots of national institutions, for instance, the French Library and the French National Archive. That was called La Grande Collecte, and those institutions used, among other means, social media to ask French citizens to send them private archive about the First World War. And they used social media for that. Not only social media, all kinds of media, but they used it. Museums used also a lot social media, so there are many examples. The Musée de la Grande Guerre in Meaux, which is one of the main museums about the Great War, with, for instance, with Péronne, created a Facebook page about a fictional fallen soldier called Léon Vivien, and Léon Vivien was supposed to post on Facebook his day-to-day experience of the Western Front. It's fictional. The historians were not happy about this because it was written based on real fallen soldiers' journals, but it was rewritten with the world of today. It's not only the fact that we could use social media during the centenary that is interesting, but it's the fact that we can link social media with a lot of data about the First World War available online. I'll give you 3 examples of databases. The database of the Dead for France, that is a database of 1.4 millions of administrative acts declaring fallen soldiers, but not only soldiers, dead for France, which is an administrative, a legal statute that gave rights to the dead and to his or her family. Of course, you know the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. It's not only about the First World War, but you've got huge elements information in their databases, or the German corresponding database, which is the Volksbund Deutsche Kriegsgräber Fürsorge, where you can, which is a database about German military cemeteries outside Germany, because as Germany with 2 world wars its territory was shrinked. The major military cemetery, German military cemetery, are outside Germany today. So you can do today quite easily the history of your grandfather, for instance, if he died during the First World War. It's quite easy to do it now with the data that you can use online. And lots of people were tweeting or posting on Facebook items from database to inform about a member of their family, for instance. My research project itself, the hashtag WW1 project, is based on a massive harvest of data, of Twitter data only, the harvesting starting on the 1st of April 2014. I stopped the harvesting on the 1st December of 2009, so a bit more than 1 month. I stopped it because at one point a research project should stop. Should end. But I wanted to have at least one 11th of November outside the centenary to be able to make a comparison, even if the 11th of November 2019 is quite close to the end of the centenary, it's only 1 year after, but it's still interesting to see if there is still a centenary effect 1 year after. I'm not going to comment tonight the year after the 11th of November 2018 because I have not yet made the analysis, but it's something I will do. The state of my database today, it's around 9.1 million tweets with 2/3 of retweets. So retweets are, you retweet when you quote a tweet as is or with a small comment. 9.1 million tweets that were published by around 1 million users. If you just, I don't know if you can see this, but if you just want to have a general view of this database, this is the top 1,000 hashtags. Everybody know what is a hashtags? A hashtag? Okay. That are present in my database. So I collect my tweets based on keywords or hashtags. So the bigger the circle is, the bigger the number of tweets contains this hashtag. Of course, the biggest circles are correspond to the hashtags I'm collecting. It's a bit more than 70 hashtags. But not only. And if you look at it, you will see that first there is no German keywords because I tried to harvest tweets in German, but it did not work. It's quite well known now, and it's been studied that the First World War is not an element of collective memory in Germany, because basically the main subject of the German collective memory is the Second World War, was the first one. So it's mainly French and English keywords, and mainly English. I've got basically 80 to 85% of tweets in English, and 10 to 15 in French, and the 5 remaining percent, depending on the time, are other languages. Can be German, Italian, Catalan, but it's too small to be studied, and for instance, and it's usually lots of noise. You will see that the hashtags are linked to either to First World War or the centenary in general, or usually to battles, Ypres, Verdun, Somme. There is lest we forget, which is an issue in my database, and which is bigger than, which is not only about the centenary. That's why it's an issue. And the expression dates back from the end of the 19th century, so before the First World War. So it's used for in lots of things. And you will see, I quote it because I will speak a bit about it at the end of this presentation. You will see keyword that should not be related to the First World War. For instance, you've got the dark green here, circle with black M. Black M is a French rapper. I will explain you why he's here. So it's mainly French and English speaking keywords. It's sometimes about the global centenary, sometimes it's about more precise events within this centenary. So I will, at the end of this introduction, first speak a bit about my methodology, but it's going to be quite fast. Then we'll give you a global overview of my results. And then we will speak about new practices on social media, new commemorating practices, and we'll speak a bit about controversies, because social media are quite well known and quite fit for controversies. So methodology. Why Twitter? Because we can. It's easy to collect tweets, very easy. Technically speaking, I'm using the streaming API because I've started to collect tweets in 2014. So I miss a few months because the centenary in France started in November 2013 more than in 2014, but that's okay. So the streaming API means that I can collect 1% of the tweets that are published. The 1% is calculated over 15 minutes. 1% of all the tweets published in one day, it's 4 million tweets. So I'm quite comfortable with that, it's okay. The problem with the streaming API is that I cannot go in the history of tweets. So I need to anticipate, and a historian is not trained to anticipate. But the Twitter API, so API, it's interface, application interface, programming interface. So it's basically a software dispositive that helps to pieces of software to exchange functionalities or data, in this case data. So I got a server that connects to Twitter and sends keywords, and Twitter is sending back tweets. And there are lots of applications that exist to analyze and to harvest tweets that are relatively easy to use. So it's easy to analyze Twitter, to be honest. It's not really impressive. It's much more difficult to analyze Facebook. It's impossible to analyze WhatsApp. It's impossible to analyze Snapchat, for instance. Facebook, it's really, really difficult. How is it happening? How do I collect tweets? Basically, I've got a server with a software, a script, a set of scripts that will connect to Twitter, send the keywords, and then Twitter will send back the tweets. The software will then pass tweets into a database. And from this database, I can extract the data and start the preparation of the data and then analyze the data. For those who are interested in that, I started to use 140 dev, which was quite interesting in 2014, but they stopped developing it. So in September 2017, when I arrived in Luxembourg and when Twitter decided to switch from 140 characters to 280 characters, I needed to switch to DMI Etiquette, which is developed in Amsterdam, which is so much better than 140 dev, which is really, really a good piece of software. But the problem is that they don't collect and don't parse the metadata the same way. So I need to use what I call in-between tools to prepare my data for the analysis. In between, it's between the harvesting and between the analysis. It's 80% of the work. It's 80% of the work, and during this work, you make decisions that will have consequences for all your research. For instance, if I want to do text analysis of tweets, I need to remove almost all hashtags and nicknames of Twitter accounts. If I don't do that, the text analysis will not be interesting. I need to remove all retweets and do my clustering, my text analysis, only on original tweets. If I do a text analysis, so computing text analysis, on my corpus with retweets, the results are not interpretable. I can't do anything with it. And then I use analysis tools, and notably, but not only Iramitech and Gephi. Gephi is quite well known, so I will not comment on that. It's done for network analysis. Iramitech is less, it's a very French-based software. It's less well-known outside France. It's an interface to R, which is statistical software for text analysis. And among the analysis that I can do a descending hierarchical clustering, which is basically a way to divide my tweets into current clusters based on co-occurrence of words. So I have, in the end, clusters of tweets that are supposed to speak not necessarily about the same topic, but to use the same kind of vocabulary. So it's clusters of tweets and not of words, because some other softwares are doing cluster of words. It's more interesting to have cluster of tweets. And it's based on quite good old statistical method from the 1980s. So there's nothing about AI or deep learning or anything like that. It's much more simple and much more easy to do. Then the last remark about the methodology, the question we always ask as historian when we set up a corpus is, have I got a balanced corpus? A corpus that is representative of something. I'm not able to answer this question with Twitter, and it's very hard to answer this question with Twitter. The only thing that I can say is that, strangely, some topics are not present in my database. I will give you 3 examples. Jean Jaurès, the assassination of Jean Jaurès is not evoked in many tweets. It is in some tweets, but not a lot. Georges Clemenceau is not that well present in my database. And for instance, the first Battle of the Marne in September 1914. But I've got answers for those 3 examples. The commemoration of Jean Jaurès was separated from the centenary because the year Jaurès, which was in France in 2014, was not only about his assassination and his role in July 1914. Georges Clemenceau can be a controversial figure in France, notably on the left, because he gave the order to shoot strikers, basically. So commemorating Georges Clemenceau was also a process that was separated from the centenary with the year Clemenceau in 2017. And then the Battle of the Marne, it's really easy. There was no big commemoration of the first Battle of the Marne. And as a consequence, there were no single keyword hashtags used by those tweeting about the Battle of the Marne. Then there is another kind of issue, which is, for instance, hashtags that are more general than the centenary. And that's the problem of the lest we forget hashtag. So lest we forget is an expression that was invented by Kipling, if I remember well, something like 20 years before the First World War. So it's broadly used in the English-speaking world for many kind of commemoration. That's why at the beginning I decided not to collect it. But in 2018, in the final phase of the centenary, it became one of the main keywords used, hashtag used, and notably on the 11th of November 2018. So for November and December and the following months, I decided to include this, lest we forget in the harvest. But one of my problems is that it was probably used a lot for all 11th of November during the centenary and probably before and after. So I will, for instance, tell you that the 11th of November in my database are in majority French speaking, but it might be not true because I don't have lest we forget in my database. I'm trying to find technical ways to correct that, but it's not that easy to collect tweets that were published in the past. So some results. So this is a very simple view on the general temporality of the tweets that are in my database, because basically it's the number of tweets per day. And you will see this series of peaks, with the biggest one being the 11th of November 2018. Even without lest we forget, it's really big. It's really a lot of tweets. This is based on a sample of my database, but basically on the 11th of November, I collected more than 900,000 tweets, so almost 1 million. And the sequence in before the 11th of November, so the month of November and the end of October, it's in total 2 million of tweets. And then you've got other peaks. So you can have peaks about battles. So Verdun, Somme, you can see Vimy, Gallipoli. So the NDAC day. There are the first peak is you've got a small one, which is the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, but it was supposed to be an international commemoration in Sarajevo, but it failed. And on Twitter, also it failed. There are a few thousand tweets, which is already big, but not that much. Then you have the entry into war of the UK. It was not the entry into the war by France, was not commemorated in France, but it was, at least on Twitter, for the UK. Then you've got the only recurring event, which is the commemoration of the armistice. Each 11th of November, there is a notable number of tweets. There is the Easter Rising, of course, the centenary of the Easter Rising. There is the centenary of the rights of the women right to vote in 1918 in UK. It cannot be in France because they had to wait a bit more. And this one is the Somme, and you've got 3 peaks for the Battle of Verdun, including one anomaly. There was a commemoration in February 2016 of the Battle of Verdun, which was very classical, traditional military commemoration of the Battle of Verdun with all the Saint-Cyr school and officers present. And then there was in May this French-German commemoration of the Battle of Verdun with 2 controversies, which are here visible because you've got this double peak here. And we will get back to this double peak to explain what happened and to see that commemorating on Twitter can also lead to very specific social media controversies. The linguistic temporality, so with this yes we forget issue that you need to keep in mind. Basically, usually it's a majority of English tweets, but with some exception. Of course, the main exception is the 11th of November, but with the lest we forget issue. And the Battle of Verdun, that is mainly French, with not a lot of tweets, English-speaking tweets, that are more concentrated on the Battle of the Somme, for instance. Sorry. So that is the clustering of the French corpus, so those clusters, those groups of tweets with similar vocabulary. If you look a bit at it, you've got clusters about big commemoration day, like with the name of the head of states or government that were here. So you've got a lot about Trump, Macron, Merkel, or the English Prime Minister, British Prime Minister. It's a bit more complicated to see them, at least in the French corpus. You've got in those big commemoration day clusters about fallen soldiers with a very general vocabulary. It's a general homage to fallen soldiers, to the French point. You've got clusters about controversies that happen during some of those big commemoration days. You've got clusters about specific fallen soldiers. You recognize those clusters because you've got the first names. Jean, Georges, Henri, and you've got their rank in the army, you've got their units, so people were tweeting about precise soldiers. You've got some clusters about the battlefield. One cluster where you can recognize comments on the enemy of that time, Germany, and you've got advertisements clusters. I published a blog post about the First World War. I published a book. We are organizing an exhibition. That's a good summary of the French-speaking corpus, and that's a projection through times of those clusters. So it's a bit hard to read, but basically, the largest the base is so that here you've got the months. The largest the base is, the biggest number of tweets were published on this month. And here you've got the color of the clusters, of the different clusters. If it's white, it means that the cluster was not pertinent on this month. If it's the color of the cluster but a bit faded, it means that it was pertinent for this month, but not that much. If it's the full color, then it means that this cluster is pertinent for this month. So what do we deduce from that? The fact is that Twitter accounts, French-speaking Twitter accounts, were not, for instance, tweeting about the French fallen soldiers the same way on the big commemoration day, that's really the general homage to fallen soldiers, and on the rest of the day, the other days when there is no big commemoration, they're tweeting about specific fallen soldiers. That's the clusters about the names, with sometimes the dates of when they died, where they died, etc., etc. There are also some clusters that are specific of big commemoration day, which are the clusters that are linked to controversies. And what is surprising in this graph is that I was expecting basically that those clusters would be present for the May 2016 commemoration of Verdun, for the 11th of November 2014, because with there was this controversy around François Hollande, and that's it. But in fact, there is one cluster about controversies that is present on all big commemoration day. So those big commemoration day, even if it's a small part of the corpus, on all commemoration day, there is someone contesting what's happening, what's commemorated, or the way it is commemorated. If we look at the English corpus clustering, there is no clusters about controversies. Doesn't mean there were no controversies. It might mean that my clustering is not precise enough. But I'm less aware of controversies on the English side. And you can find some clusters that are more or less close to the cluster that you find in the French corpus. So the clusters about the general homage to fallen soldiers, for instance, that are pertinent for the big commemoration days. You've got clusters about exhibition. You've got almost one dedicated cluster about the poppies of the Tower of London. But you've got also those advertisement clusters about exhibition, etc. You've got clusters and maybe more tweets, even in proportion, about the battlefield. That's probably because the central figure of the French memory about the First World War, the fallen soldiers, the central figure of the British memory, as far as I know, of the First World War, it's the fallen soldiers, but through the battlefield. The battlefield is important because the fallen soldiers stayed in France or in Belgium, because the British military cemeteries are in France and Belgium. So there is the battlefield seems to be more important. And if we project that through times, we've got the same effect of some clusters with a general homage to fallen soldiers, or that are relating to big commemoration day, are specific of the months with the big commemoration days, and some clusters are more specific about the rest of the day, the other months, the other days. Then I'm doing something which is not network analysis. I'm not pretending to do that, because although I have also some training in sociology, I don't pretend to do network analysis, but I still use network visualization, sometimes more to search things, to find for things, to visualize things elsewhere. And here we've got a visualization of a network of the top 500 nodes, so 500 Twitter accounts, those that tweeted the most. The nodes, I don't know if you see anything, I'm sorry. The nodes are basically Twitter accounts. The links are retweets, mentions, or answers. And the size of the nodes was calculated based on the betweenness degree. So the nodes are bigger if they tend to be important to, how to say that, to create links between other accounts. And what is striking is that if you look at the main nodes, the main Twitter accounts on the French side, it's really structured and centered around the account of the Mission du Centenaire, which was the governmental commission that organized and supervised the centenary in France. It's a quite typical case of French centralization. It's not only the Mission du Centenaire, you've got a journalist that was very present, Stéphane Trouillard, who was really on all big commemoration day tweeting about the commemoration. You've got the 1J, 1P account. I will explain what it is. And if we look closer, you can see some historians that I can quote because I asked them their permission. For instance, Nicolas Beaupré is in Clermont-Ferrand, or Francisca Imburger today in Paris-Sorbonne. And they are also doing the link between French-speaking historians and some English-speaking historians. On the English side, it's much more diverse. You've got museums, you've got media, the BBC, the dedicated BBC accounts, so the general BBC account and the dedicated First World War account. You've got, of course, the Commonwealth War Grave Commission, you've got the Population, you've got museums like the Imperial War Museum. The centenary for the Imperial War Museum in London was quite a big thing because it was reopened, if I remember well. And you've got lots of public history projects that you can see quite easily, and some amateur historians. Amateur historians are also present, the one on the French side, the 1J, 1P accounts, but there are more than on the English side, but there are also more notes on the English side anyway. So up to now, the one of the conclusion we can have, if you look at the clustering, the contents of the tweets, if you look at 1 century of collective memory of the First World War, the content of the tweet is not original. I mean, on the French side, there is a strong importance of the Prélude. On the English side, the British side, sorry, there is a strong presence of fallen soldiers and the battlefield. So what's new with social media? And one of the things that is new, it's practices. It's the way we are practicing commemoration. So this is the famous 1J, 1P hashtags. 1J, 1P for un jour un poilu, 1 day, 1 fallen soldier. It's linked to the database for of the Dead for France, which is a database of 1.4 fallen soldiers around. It's a bit less at the beginning of the centenary. It's more at the end of the centenary because they added items about families who ask for the statutes for their dead parents and demand that were refused. But this database was very badly structured. It's basically image of administrative acts, so image of text with few metadata. It was published in 2003, and in 2013, the Ministry of Defense, that is now the Ministry of the Armies, published a transcription module. So a module that, providing you're creating an account, allows you to transform an image of text into text seen as text by the computer, which means that you can do very better search within the database, and so that you can use the database far more easily. But the ministry did not do any community management or did not encourage anybody to use this module. So it's French citizens, and not only French citizens, who used this module and who did some community management to encourage people to transcribe those images of administrative acts into text. And 1/3 of the transcription, at least, were linked to this website that was launched by a French citizen from Brittany, Jean-Michel Gillot. And he asked people on Twitter, but also on Facebook, to go on the database once a day to transcribe 1 administrative act a day. The aim being double. The aim being that first to transcribe the whole database by the 11th of November 2018, which was done, which was not that easy at the beginning, but they finally succeeded in it. And it was really seen as a way to pay homage to each fallen soldiers, not only fallen soldiers, because there can be civilians in this database, and to allow future historians to better use the database in the future. So it's really a memory and history project. I think that there are other examples of transcription or of crowdsourcing, but that was basically the biggest surprise in the French centenary. The second thing that is quite new, it's controversies. It's not new in itself. For the bicentenary of the French Revolution, which is the previous large-scale commemoration in France, there was this controversy, this academic controversy around François Furet, the work of François Furet, and the way he was seeing the terror, etc., as a precursor of the 20th century and the mass crime of the 20th century. But that's an academic controversy. Here you've got a controversy that is of a very different nature, which is Dominique Boulier, who is a French sociologist, would describe that as vibration. So a very brief but intense propagation of information, mimetic propagation of information. And the controversies I'm going to talk about for a few minutes, it's about those young German and French citizens that you can see on this picture, and they're running wearing white colors. They're running in the middle of the cemetery that is in front of the ossuary of Douaumont. And on site, so that was on the 29th of May, on site it was seen as very impressive. The Archbishop of Verdun defended this scenography. But for those people watching TV and tweeting, after watching TV, it was seen as a kind of profanation of a cemetery. And that's the controversy on the 29th of May 2016. And you've got a first controversy, which is linked to the will of the mayor of Verdun to organize a concert to thank those young French and German. And the concert was supposed to be a concert of Black M, so this French rapper. And this French rapper is of Senegalese origin, so sometimes his words and his songs are quite critical to France. So we're speaking about this small anomaly, and this is, if we zoom in, basically you've got a first controversy about this French-German commemoration of Verdun. The first one starts from French far-right website called F de Souche, goes on Twitter. It decreases a bit on Twitter, but then several press articles are published online or on paper. So the controversy starts again on Twitter on the following Monday when the paper articles are published. And then the second controversy during the commemoration is of a very different nature because it's really the double screen effect, people watching on TV the commemoration and seeing it not the way the scenographist scheduled it, and tweeting about this. And just, this is the number of tweets per hour during the commemoration, and when those young German and French starts to run, in fact, the number of tweets doubles. So it's two different kinds of controversies. This is the clustering. If you know a bit French and if you can see that, you will see that it's sometimes very vulgar vocabulary. It was really a tough controversy. Usually people tweeting during this controversy, lots of them did not tweet during the rest of the centenary, or at least are not in my database. So it's also this propagation effects that the retweets that social media allows. Some conclusion, because I think I'm out of time. Well, there is a kind of opposition between contents of tweets that is not really original, that follows the rhythm of the commemoration, and practices. If when there is no big commemoration day, when the day is normal, we've got more tweets about specific fallen soldiers, it's because people on the French side, on the French-speaking part of the corpus, were going to this database and transcribing things and transcribing its items. So there is this opposition of very new for commemoration practices. It's kind of practices that we know for 10 years now, but it's in that case quite new for a commemoration, and this opposition with content, which is still very classical content with those central figures of the collective memory that are fallen soldiers or battlefields. And there is a novelty within this good old controversy thing. There were no, at least on the French side, academic controversies during the centenary. Basically because the academic controversy about the First World War in France happened during the 19th and the 2000s, so the controversy was over. On the French side, it's very French because the controversy was not really the same in Germany or Britain or Ireland. And because although the Mission du Centenaire was a scientific committee that was very well thought, with a president, Antoine Pro, who could really manage the opposition between French and non-French historians. But you got a new kind of controversies. Here again, it's not new in the world of social media, but it's quite new in the world of commemoration, which are really controversies, those vibrations, those mimetic propagation of information, very fast and very intense mimetic propagation of information that really encourages controversies. And I think I will stop there and thanks a lot.
Thank you, Frédéric. That was fascinating. I'm sure there are lots of questions. So I'll anyone who wants to start here.
You mentioned the thing with the Ferdinand thing with the media. I just wondered, were the peaks you were seeing also associated with media coverage, like the TV commemorations and the press commemorations? Did they were they linked to your peaks? I mean, obviously, they would be linked to the battles, things like the battles anyway. But I just wondered how far
it is linked with commemoration on.
Well, the tweets to the media coverage. So if there's,
there is a link. So it's mainly linked to big commemoration, but that are covered by the media. But I'll give you one example so that you can see the link. But at the beginning of my project, when the database was not so big, I noted that there was this day with more tweets than usual, and it was linked to the coverage by the British media of an action by David Cameron, who went to a school to plant poppies, I think. And I think it was there only because it was covered by traditional media, by the press and by the BBC.
So people wouldn't otherwise. Essentially, what I'm thinking is whether people were thinking of the war because of the coverage, or they were already thinking. A couple of us in Western Front Association, we got included in your groups of people tweeting Western Front Association, but. We tend to think perhaps more about war than the general public.
I think there is a strong correlation between media coverage and the peaks you can see. That's sure. But I did not go into the details, but when you go to the day-to-day activity on Twitter about the centenary, I'm not sure it's linked to the media coverage. And here you've got lots of citizens, sometimes fascinated by the First World War, sometimes willing to pay homage to the fallen soldiers, whether maybe a member of their family, sometimes amateur historians, but here are the day-to-day practice that is not linked to the media coverage. So you've got, I think, several levels to analyze. It's not only media coverage.
Thank you.
But it's hard to know because I don't know when a tweet is published because of media coverage or the media coverage. It's just correlation.
Adam?
Hi, I'm Adam Cribble. I grew up in Canada, so I learned about the First World War probably a similar way to the way Richard did, and probably completely differently to the way everybody else in the room did. And I'm just thinking about in terms of how what you're looking at might tell us about a change from the way things used to be. We all learned about the First World War within our national context bubbles, probably within a classroom, someone standing at the front with a textbook telling us the way that it's supposed to be. Now that we've got this global network of communication, are you noticing, do those stories of the smaller nations like Canada, like Belgium, get taken over by the louder voices of France or Britain or the United States, or are we getting a global story? Do you have any sense of kind of how this sculpts those little stories when we put it out into a broad open form of media?
What is global, it's the media, Twitter itself, the way we tweet. But it's not the content. It's basically, the content is national. So I will not speak about Belgium, because Belgium is a very specific case, because you don't have the same perception of the First World War on the Flemish side and the French-speaking and the Wallon side. And the Flemish side was, and the centenary was really divided into two, with the Flemish side far more. There was an article written about that at the beginning of the centenary. The Flemish side prepared the centenary starting from 2005. So it was really more dynamic, and they saw the opportunity in terms of tourism, not necessarily in terms of commemoration. But not only, of course, there is a lot of collective memory side. And there were no national initiatives and no transnational, if we can say that, between Wallonie and the Flemish side and the Flemish Belgium initiatives, but one kind of federation of cities, but that's it.
So the national myths are still standing strong then?
Yes. If you look at, there were some international commemoration, the 11th of November 2018, of course, that ended in Douaumont. There was an attempt for the assassination of the Archduke, the centenary of the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, but it was a failed attempt. The Battle of the Somme is French-British. The Battle of Verdun in May, it's French-German, but it's the only example. The rest of it, it's very national. And even within the national framework, you've got strong division. It was also a French-Canadian commemoration. You've got even division within this national structure. For instance, what I've remarked for the 11th of November 2018 is that the Twitter account using Lest We Forget are not using WW1, and the Twitter account using WW1 are not using Lest We Forget. And both are probably at least English-speaking in majority, and probably in majority British. So the national framework is still there, but the media used is global. That's what Rousseau and Henri Rousseau and Andreas Hewson wrote about in general about commemoration and collective memory. There is a globalization of collective memory, but it's the ways we commemorate and we remember that is globalizing, but not the content. The content is national-based, it's nation-based. I suppose you can find exceptions, but that's the general framework.
It's a question related to the Lest We Forget hashtag, really. And I was also struck by you mentioned the Easter Rising hashtag too. Some of that would have been explicitly connected to the First World War, but a lot of the Twitter activity on the Irish side would not have been. It's just something that happened during that, been talked about in different ways. How did you, if you did, try to get rid of things that use the hashtag but are not directly related to the centenary, or did you just take the position that there's so much of it that it all kind of comes out in the wash and just leave it all in there?
I took the second option, but I had reason to take it. Because apart from three hashtags, which were Somme, Verdun, because it's also news about what's happening in Meuse, in Verdun, and in the department of the Somme. But in fact, with the clustering, the noise is in one cluster very identifiable, so that's okay. The third hashtag that was a problem, it's 11/9, because it was used in France, it was used in Britain, and probably in other countries, but it's also used in Catalonia. But not at all in relation with the First World War, but with the independence of Catalonia. But here again, I've got that in one cluster, very easy to identify because I don't speak Catalan, but I can recognize words in Catalan. And so when you prepare your clustering, you progressively eliminate those clusters of noise. But the noise is here, yes. I don't have a lot of noise, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's maybe 5%. And in the case of the Easter Rising, I did not collect, if I remember well, hashtags specific to the Easter Rising. So if it's present here, it means that hashtags related to the First World War were used. Yeah, I need to check that, but if I remember well, there's nothing specific about the Easter Rising.
So there's some other context in between there that's saying this actually, yeah. Great, thank you.
With your network diagram and how the accounts were interacting with each other, is there much to be sort of said around how the big institutions in Britain engage with the sort of amateur historians and the general members of the public, whether the institutions were just sort of broadcasting information and people were also broadcasting information, or whether they were successfully actively engaging with those people?
I have not investigated that precisely on the English-speaking side. On the French-speaking side, I know it for sure because they engage with me, but not only. The Mission du Centenaire sometimes engage with people, but it was not a systematic policy. The Mission du Centenaire, the Twitter account of the Mission du Centenaire talked to all those Twitter accounts that were participating to the transcription of the Dead for France database, and then the heads of those Twitter accounts, so the most popular Twitter accounts in this community. And some members of the mission directly themselves tweeted about the centenary, sometimes on private grounds, and here they got engaged with other people. But I did not have any specific indicator to measure the engagement. What I can say is that for the Léon Vivien Facebook page from the Musée de la Grande Guerre, they got a strong engagement. I mean, all posts of Léon Vivien was commented, and it was encouraged.
Yes. Thank you for that. I really enjoyed that. I was wondering, given probably the unique sort of database that you've collected, have you talked to any libraries or memory institutions about depositing it with them so that it will be a resource for future historians?
Not yet. It's linked to the fact that this research project was born by chance. At the beginning, just almost for the fun, if fun can stick to the First World War, just to see what would happen, and it happened to become my main research project. But at the beginning, I had the know-how to collect massively tweets, and it was a discussion with a French historian, Nicolas Beaupré, in the train back from Blois, where there is this annual event between academic historians and secondary school historians and amateur historians, who told me, if you can collect tweets, why don't you collect tweets about the First World War? And that was it. So it was not supposed to be a research project at the beginning. And at the time, all the more that at that time, my position was a position of research engineer, not of researcher at the Sorbonne. So I was not, it was a side project. So now the time to engage with an heritage institution to keep those tweets has come, so I need to see that. Where I did have some discussion with some heritage institution, it's my first publication, and the conclusion is still good. One of the conclusions was that French museums on Twitter did not tweet correctly. I mean, they did not take into account the general rules of and sometimes non-explicit rules of Twitter. For instance, les invalides, they are tweeting without hashtags, so nobody's listening, nobody's reading them. They are not part of the global discussion. The Historial de la Grande Guerre in Péronne. There is two accounts, one for the research center and the other one for the historian itself. And here again, they are not tweeting a lot, they are not using hashtags. I think they even suppressed the Twitter account. The same for the Musée de la Grande Guerre de Meaux. It's a bit better for the Musée de la Grande Guerre de Meaux. I have not, there's something that should be said clearly. I have not looked precisely at what they're doing on other social media. There might be far better on Facebook, for instance, which is more used maybe in France than it is in Britain. Twitter is more used in Britain, obviously. And at that point, the people tweeting with the account of the historian in Péronne just told me that reading the article, they understood that they had lots of works. And the research center, the account of the research center of Péronne, basically it's two historians that I know very well. I can, even with the style of the tweet, knows which one of them has tweeted. So it's a different case, and it's a research center. A research center has not necessarily as a name to engage with people anymore. So that's my relation with a research institution. I'm a bit shameful about that because I should have talked sooner about that, but this research project has been carried out in 3 different countries, including one outside the EU. So it's not because I was 2 years in Lausanne, and so it's not necessarily easy to engage discussions, long-term discussions with institutions that change each time I change countries.
Can I ask you perhaps to maybe go back to your initial comments that you made about memory? So you started with this term of memory inflation. You started with this idea sort of how maybe perhaps the present infects the way we see the past, or that it becomes sort of unstable. So I was wondering, having done your research now and reflecting back on these larger questions about memory and history, how would you comment on that? So I was wondering specifically about the fact that you said, so especially in the British context, there are very few controversies that you could see. And okay, there might be many reasons for that, but, or also this idea, the content in itself is not very remarkable. Is that something where you say, yes, we have a lot of memory, but it's not in terms of that we really gain deeper knowledge of the history of the First World War? And also what I was wondering about when you mentioned this Verdun controversy about the commemorations as they were running through the cemetery, and then it creates this, as you called it, this vibration. Is that also then something that perhaps the way we see the past is too much infected by the present, or that we can only think about the past in this kind of through these controversies, which are not really about the First World War, but which are very much about now. So I was wondering where that leaves you in terms of thinking about these debates.
Yeah, we could take 2 hours to answer that. My main problem with this literature about regime of historicity, about a border present that's converged, is that it remains very negative. It's memory, collective memory is seen as a negative thing, and I would love to find a way to describe the relation between memory and history that would be more positive, because for me there's not an interruption between memory and history. At some point things are clearly in the realm of memory, at some point they are clearly in the realm of history, but there are things sometimes where you don't know if it's history or memory. Some colleagues from Brazil are starting to talk about updatism, the fact that using social media and new media in general updates the way we see the past on a daily basis. But it's even going further than the notion of presentism that was developed by Hartog. I really would like, I think it's there is something which is in the realm of these update things, because it's really, during those controversies, it's exactly what you can see. In fact, if we go back to this photography is terrible for French. It's almost normal for German. I don't know if you know George Moss's Fallen Soldiers. there is a chapter about cemeteries after the war in France and Germany. And basically, we don't conceptualize cemeteries the same way. And the guy who did this scenography was a German. And in Germany, in some cities, you see people doing their running in the morning in cemeteries. Sometimes the cemeteries are much more within the life in Germany and some part of Northern Europe than in France and other parts. And maybe, I suppose Southern Europe, I'm not sure. But than in France, it's really sure. So that's not only about the fact we see the present, but that's only probably this controversy is also linked to strong cultural differences that remains between France and Germany. At some point, it's hopeful that there remain some strong cultural differences because it would be boring if everybody had the same culture. But sometimes it creates issues. It creates moments where moments of tensions, and that's one of the cases. On the other hand, when I see the day-to-day work that amateur historians could have done, not only in France, I'm not sure that those amateur historians can be described within the frame of presentism or of the broader present. I think they're really practicing the past. And that's different from what Hartog or Gumbrecht or even Henri Rousseau are describing the relation to the past in our era of supposed memory inflation. But I still haven't found a way to find positive words to describe, or more positive, or at least neutral concept to describe that, and the relation between past and present and future, or between memory and history. I think it's far more complicated than just presentism or just a broader present. But I still don't have the concept to describe that.
Thank you very much, Frédéric. I really enjoyed that and very similarly. What I wanted to do is kind of move away from some of the content thing and a little bit on the practicality. I found it very interesting when you said that 80% of your time was spent sort of preparing the data and everything else like that. And I just wondered whether you having gone through that process, having seen how much that takes, and I know it will always take a large amount, whether there is lessons learned that could have reduced that amount of time, whether there is, software or a different approach that you might have taken that might have been able to ease that burden, shall we say.
This is a one-man project. I'm starting a new project that is about discussion about around mainly, discussion online about the European Union during the 90s and the 2000s. And I'm working for an article with my colleague, Maria Virukov, who is specialized in natural language processing. And it goes really much faster because she knows far better than me what she's doing. Because she can really tailor her code so that it fits my needs, providing, accepting that she's also doing research, so she's also this process is also supposed to be of interest to her, of course. So that's the first way, it's to work with computer scientists, with NLP scientists, with data scientists in general. But the fact that this is a one-man project is interesting because now I know what I want. And that's also allows to be a bit faster. For this new project, it's not going to be faster, but that's because the data we're going to use is far more complicated to get. But that's another problem. I could not do it myself. But yeah, working not alone is one of the solutions. On the other hand, if you look at, because I did my PhD in a very traditional way, more than 50% of my time was spending time in the reading room of Archive Center or the reading room of the library. And so it was also a very long time. the analog way of processing data was also a very long time, and I'm not sure that we have got the interest to shrink this part, to reduce the time we spend on this part, because this 80% of my time allowed me to very well know my corpus. It's, I don't know, if, the French historian Claire Lemercier and Claire Zalk, they've got this manual about, they wrote this manual, this book about quantitative treatment of historical data. I think it's been translated now into English. And one of their arguments is that working with your data, even if it's in a simple spreadsheet, even if it's not big data, even if it's small data, this time, spending time with your data allows you to really well know your sources. And in a way, I think I know better my sources with this project. That's during my PhD, where I took notes, like in, I don't know if you know Arlette Farge and the area of the archive, but she describing the historian copying sometimes word towards the archive. I've known that. But in a way, I think I know better my primary sources today than I used to during my PhD. Well, I was not copying by hand, I was already typing, copying on my primary sources on my computer and with the database, but it was still in this traditional framework of the work of the historian in Archive Center. I think we always worked a lot on our data with classical primary sources or born digital sources. And it's important to spend time with your data, with your primary sources. So one of the criteria for me, one of the criteria to choose the software I'm using for my analysis, that the software does not separate me from my primary sources. With Irami-Tech, I can go back to each single tweet if I want to. We need to stick to the primary source. Okay, I hope I answered my question.
Anyone else? Any questions on Twitter or the live stream? Adam?
Can I do a second one? Is that all right?
Of course.
When you're looking for stuff like this, you only find what you go looking for, obviously, right? And I'm just wondering, pick up on Richard's question, can you reflect on how you might have chosen your search strategies differently if you're going to do this again? Because I suspect you've chosen words that allow you to find the French examples, like the French examples and the British ones. I don't know if you picked the words that would get you the New Zealand stuff or the South African experience. So how might you, if you were going to teach us to learn from your experience with regards to finding what we're really looking for rather than what we think of first, how might you make that suggestion? How can we be better searchers of these big messy things?
Collaboration. Not necessarily carrying out that kind of projects with many people, but talking to many people before you launch your harvesting, and talking to people who are specialized, because it's not my the First World War is not mine, and memory studies aren't either. It's not my specialty at the beginning. It's not my training. But speaking to other historians might help, and using social media for that, it's a good idea. And now you've got tools although that help you to find pertinent hashtags based on keywords you will give to the website. Now, dedicated website to refine your search of hashtags. But I think collaboration, speaking to people, trying to maybe not to publish fast, but to publish about your research on blogs and to try to get comments, it's a good idea. The problem being that in my case, when I say, hey, I've got a database with 9 million tweets, lots of people do not want to ask any question. You know, there is this kind of wow effect that's just prevent people to ask questions, and that's very annoying, because I think collaboration debates are a good way to answer your question and to answer sometimes my problems I don't know if what I'm doing is good or not because nobody asks questions. Nobody debates about this research project because there is this. I don't like the term, but this kind of big data effect that prevents people to ask questions, either because they think that analyzing 9 million tweets is stupid, has no interest, or because it's they think that they are not able to understand what I'm doing. Whether it's in fact not that, even if in fact it's not that complicated. It's not complicated at all. I mean, I'm not programming, I'm just using code from others. I've got a good knowledge of server administration, can be of help, but for the analysis themselves, it's not complicated. So I think, yeah, collaboration and debate.
Thank you, Frédéric. I will leave it there. I think we have our next panel just before you go on the 4th of February. If you're interested, we'll have a panel about teaching digital history. It will be Claire Rowan from Warwick, Rob Houghton from Winchester, and also James Baker on the 4th of February. And this will take place at UCL, so have a look on the website if you're interested in that. And please do join us if you can downstairs for some drinks. If you still have some time to stay with us, and please join me in thanking Frédéric one more time.
And one last, if you haven't signed in, could I please get you signed in?